So hi everyone, and welcome to the recorded version of the record suspension application workshop. So I'm just going to pull up my PowerPoint presentation. All right. So I just want to first say hi to everyone watching this. So I am going to be speaking to you today about the Parole Board of Canada's 9-step application process for a record suspension. And right now, the time of this recording is July 2022. So the application process does get updated quite frequently. So it's just important that when you are ready to apply, that you get the most current resources on the application process from the Parole Board of Canada. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about that on where you can access those resources a bit later in the presentation. But I just wanted to start by letting you know that. All right, so my name is Lauren Walsh-Greene, and I am a law student doing my summer internship placement with the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne's Justice Department, and I'm doing this internship through the Debwewin Summer Law Program. So thank you all so much for watching this, and as we're soon going to discuss, getting a record suspension can really open up a lot of doors for you. So it's wonderful that you're watching this right now and informing yourself about the process. It's also really helpful to know that there are many individuals in your shoes. So there are over 3 million Canadians with criminal records, and the Parole Board of Canada receives thousands of record suspension applications every year. Now, before we begin, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about my internship program called the Debwewin Summer Law Program. And Debwewin means truth in Ojibwe. So basically, the program came about because of recommendation 6D from the Honorable Frank Iacobucci's 2013 report titled First Nations Representation in Ontario Juries. And his mandate was to make recommendations that would increase the amount of representation on Ontario's jury roll of Indigenous people living in reserve communities, and to strengthen the relationship between the Ministry of the Attorney General and Indigenous peoples on this issue. And one of his recommendations was to create a summer law or a summer education and legal assistance program where law students could be placed around Ontario with different Indigenous communities. So, different Indigenous organizations. So in light of this, the Debwewin Summer Law Program was created, and it is funded in partnership between law schools in Ontario and the Ministry of the Attorney General's Indigenous Justice Division. So part of the program is for each student to create 2 public legal education workshops. And so in consultation with my supervisor at the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne's Justice Department, Joyce King, we decided to have my workshop on the topic of applying for record suspensions. And this is actually really relevant to the Honorable Frank Iacobucci's report, because in recommendation 14B, he actually recommends encouraging and supporting Indigenous individuals to apply for record suspensions. And I'm not going to go into much detail about it, but basically suspended records can help individuals in certain situations become eligible for jury duty in Ontario. Also, just to let you know, as a law student, I cannot give you legal advice. I can only give you legal information. So this is a legal information workshop. Now, the first question is, why is it useful to get a record suspension? So one of the main things that probably comes to mind for a lot of people is it can be useful for jobs that require a criminal record check. So for some jobs, you can only be eligible for them if you have a suspended record. So a local example of this is working as a police constable for the Akwesasne Mohawk Police Service. So I called them and they confirmed that to be a police constable, you cannot have an active criminal record. You could only get hired if you had a suspended record. So that's just an example of a type of job where a suspended record is crucial. Also, my supervisor was telling me about another local example of a community member she knew who worked in construction who could work on some contracts. However, they couldn't work on any government contracts because of their criminal record. So again, having a criminal record limited their opportunity in that way. There's other jobs that might not automatically disqualify you if you had a criminal record. However, and they would just assess your criminal record on a case-by-case basis. So an example I found online was if you're becoming a teacher with the Ontario College of Teachers, you need to be certified by them. And they say on their website that having a criminal record does not automatically disqualify you, but they do assess each individual in that situation on a case-by-case basis. So again, in those situations, it'd still be helpful to have a suspended record because that will just make your job application process smoother. Now, another important reason to get a record suspension is to remove the stigma of a criminal record and to help you build confidence with now knowing the amount of different jobs that are open to you now that you have, and different opportunities that are open to you now that you have a suspended record. Also, completing the record suspension application process and successfully, if you are successfully granted a record suspension, that in itself would also build confidence because you put the work in and it paid off. So now we're going to talk about how does a record suspension work and what are its limits. So the Parole Board of Canada is the federal agency that grants criminal record suspensions, and they do this under a law called the Criminal Records Act. So the information that's going to follow in this presentation, it's based mostly on the Parole Board of Canada's resources. However, I've also done some surrounding research just to elaborate on the process and clarify certain things. And I've spoken to a few Parole Board of Canada officers as well to clarify certain parts of the application process. It's also important to note that record suspensions were formerly called pardons. So that's why you might see that term pardons pop up sometimes, just so you're aware. So how does a record suspension work? So the Parole Board of Canada says that a record suspension does not erase the fact that you were convicted of a crime, but keeps the records separate and apart from other records. So what happens is when you get a record suspension, your criminal record is removed from the CPIC database. CPIC stands for Canadian Police Information Center, and it's essentially a national information sharing system which provides information about crimes and criminals. So once you get a record suspension, your criminal record is removed from that database. However, there is an exception to this, and it's for suspended records of former sexual offenders. So those suspended records are still flagged within CPIC just in case a vulnerable sector check is ever done on that person, because that is essential information they need to know. The Parole Board of Canada also states that the Criminal Record Act only applies to records kept by federal organizations, but most provincial and municipal justice agencies will also restrict access to those records once they find out that a record suspension has been granted by the Parole Board of Canada, but they just give you that little warning. Also, it's important to note that the Parole Board of Canada has the power to reactivate your criminal record, and that's why they say, it's not actually erase that you once committed this, that you were convicted of a crime. And so they might reactivate your record if you're convicted of a new crime or if there's some evidence demonstrating that you're no longer of good conduct. The Parole Board of Canada also states that a record suspension has no effect on any driving or weapon prohibition orders. So it's really important to make sure that you still follow those orders. Now, before you get started, I know that applying for a record suspension might seem like a bit of an intimidating process. However, the Parole Board of Canada has really tried to break it down into 9 straightforward steps. Also, if you have any questions for them along the way, they are really accessible. Here is their phone number and email address, and it's also on the record suspension application guide on the cover. And I had to call them a few times in researching this workshop. It only would take me about a minute to get through. And I found every Parole Board of Canada officer I spoke to was really, really helpful and kind. Also, I know it is intimidating for some people for sure to speak to a Parole Board of Canada officer. And I confirmed with one of the officers I spoke to that, when you call them with questions, they are really just there to help you gather the information you need. That officer also confirmed that they are just responsible, the officers who will speak to you on the phone and answer your questions are just responsible for pre-screening applications. They don't actually do the full review and investigation of the application. So just so you're aware, in case that makes you feel more comfortable calling them and asking any questions you have during the application process. Also, I am only here for a few more weeks, but if you have any questions about this workshop, I'm very happy to answer them, and you can just contact the Justice Department to reach me. And also, all right, and now today's workshop, as we discussed, is based on the current record suspension application guide. That is now July 2022. However, this guide could get updated in the future. For example, the application process even changed since last year. So also, this workshop, I'm going to try to be pretty extensive, but of course I can't cover everything. So it's really important that before you apply, you get the complete and up-to-date information. And you can do this by accessing the record suspension application guide. So you can go to this link right here. And so you can look at that link. Also at the Justice Department, they've made a brochure about the process. And so that brochure also has this link. But basically, when you go to this link, you just scroll down and you'll see here, this is right up here, the step-by-step instructions. That's the instructions online. And right below it, circled in red, that's the PDF guide. And within the guide at the back of it, it has all the forms you need. Or if you scroll further down on this page, there's also all the forms you need that you can download separately. And if when you go to download this and review it, if you also want to print it, the Justice Department is very happy to print it for you. So just contact the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne's Justice Department, and they can definitely download and print the most recent record suspension application guide for you. Now, when you're filling in the forms, some general tips is you need to make sure that you're answering all the questions truthfully and completely. So they're not doing so has the potential consequence of having the application returned to you if it's incomplete, or if you're even granted a record suspension, if the Parole Board of Canada found out later that you were trying to hide something or untruthful about something, this could have the potential consequence of having your record suspension ceased or revoked. So you'll also see throughout the guide when you're reading through each step, they say, make sure to answer all of the questions. So unfortunately, the Parole Board of Canada has to return many applications every year just because they're incomplete. So if there's ever a section you're unsure about, don't leave it blank. Just contact the Parole Board of Canada and find out what to do for it. Also, for the forms, you complete them in blue or black ink and write in block letters. So those are capital letters. And a Parole Board of Canada officer told me that actually, if you download the forms directly online, those PDFs are fillable, so you can actually type in them, and you don't have to write in block letters if you're doing that. You can just type normally. And so if you'd prefer to type it than handwrite it, that's also an option for you. Now, before you apply, it's really important to confirm that you're eligible to apply, because you don't want to go through all of that work in applying to find out, oh, wait, I'm not eligible to apply. So some general guidelines of who can apply. The Parole Board of Canada says the following. So they say that you may apply if you were convicted of an offense in Canada under a federal act or regulation as an adult, or you were convicted of a crime in another country and were transferred to Canada under those two different pieces of legislation that you'll see on the PowerPoint. They say you do not need to apply if you only received an absolute or conditional discharge, or you were only convicted in a youth court or youth justice court. And then they say you may not be eligible for a record suspension if your first offense was committed on or after March 13, 2012, and you have been convicted to a prison term of 2 years or more for more than 3 indictable offenses, or you were convicted of an offense found in Schedule 1 of the Criminal Records Act and do not meet the exception criteria. So we're going to talk about Schedule 1 offenses more in Step 6 and what those exception criteria are. So these are two situations where you may not be eligible. So if you can apply, then to be eligible, you need to have completed all of your sentences and completed the appropriate waiting period time. And when they say all of your sentences, they mean all fines, surcharges, costs, restitution, and compensation orders, as well as all sentences of imprisonment, conditional sentences, including parole and statutory release, and any probation orders. So all of those things fall under the umbrella of sentences. So now to determine your appropriate waiting period, if you want, right now you can pause this and you can download the record suspension application guide and follow along with me, or you can follow along here on the screen. So this is a waiting period table on page 2 of the record suspension application guide. And I called a Parole Board of Canada officer just to confirm that I was reading it properly. But basically you have to first identify when your first offense was committed, and also whether that it was a summary or indictable conviction. So you'll be able to see on this table that summary offenses and indictable offenses have different waiting periods. So just so you're aware, indictable offenses are more serious offenses. So an example is aggravated assault. That's an indictable offense, whereas summary offenses are less serious offenses. So disturbing the peace is an example of a summary offense. So here you check the table. And so let's say your first offense was committed between June 29th, 2010 and March 12th, 2012. And basically how it works is that waiting period that your first offense falls in applies to all of your convictions. So that is, it's treated as a chunk together. So that's what the Parole Board of Canada officer confirmed for me. Another really important thing to note is that the waiting period clock only begins after you've completed all of your sentences. So let's say that your waiting period is 5 years, then only after you've completed all of your sentences would that 5-year clock begin. So that's very important to know. So just because this is tricky, especially if you've committed more than one offense and you're just trying to figure out, how to read this table and, what time period will apply for all of your offenses, it's a really good idea to contact the Parole Board of Canada if you're reading it and it looks like you're eligible, and just go over it with your situation with them and just confirm that you're eligible. Because again, just calling them will take a couple minutes, and then you'll have the peace of mind of making sure you're reading everything properly and you definitely are eligible before you put that time and work in. Also on page 3 of the guide, they say that if you were convicted of simple possession of cannabis, there's a different record suspension application to use, and there's a link listed for it. And I just checked it out briefly, and it is a shorter application, so you definitely want to make sure you do that. And also, if you were convicted of simple possession of cannabis and other offenses, you still need to do this main record suspension application process that we're going over today, but there are some special instructions for that situation. So again, just look at page 3 of the guide for those instructions. All right, so now we are going to get into the 9 steps of the record suspension application process. So the first step is on page 5 of the guide, and it's basically just getting your criminal record. So you can do this with the Akwesasne Mohawk Police Service, and it costs $40. So basically what happens is the Akwesasne Mohawk Police Service will take your fingerprints and then submit them electronically to the RCMP to generate your criminal record. And the Parole Board of Canada lets you know that you need to make sure that your fingerprint submission is submitted electronically and that it's indicated that you're applying for a record suspension. And yeah, so then once you've submitted it, you wait for your criminal record and you'll receive it from the RCMP. And if the RCMP provides you any additional documents along with it, the Parole Board of Canada says to make sure you submit all of those documents to the RCMP within your, my apologies, I misspoke. So the Parole Board of Canada says that if the RCMP sends you any additional documents, just make sure you include all of those additional documents within your application. Now, a really important thing to do is once you receive your criminal record check, once you receive your criminal record, double check to make sure that all your convictions are there, because it's your responsibility alone to make sure that you're reporting all of your convictions to the Parole Board of Canada. So if you see that there's a conviction that's missing from your criminal record, then you need to get a proof of conviction, and you can do that with the court that heard your case or the police service that arrested you. And here on page 5 of the guide, they say the things that the proof of conviction needs to include. So date in court, the offense, the sentence, and the arresting police force. Also, if you were convicted of any crimes outside of Canada, you also need to submit that information to the Parole Board of Canada. So this is really a situation where it's full disclosure. You really need to let them know about every single conviction you have. Now, step 2 is about getting your court information. So basically, you do this through the court information form. And if you receive different sentences in different courts, then you need to have them each fill out the court information form. So if you want to look at the court information form, it's at the back of the guide. And you'll see that you have to answer questions 1 to 6. And then there's a for court use only section, and that part is just for the court to fill out. And when you give the court the court information form to fill out, you'll need to provide them with a copy of your criminal record. The guide also provides this really handy checklist. It's all information that's on the court information form, but it's just helpful to go over just to make sure the form has all of those really essential elements. And I asked a officer what they meant by proof and date of last payment when they're talking about any fines, victim surcharges, restitution, and compensation. And I asked what they meant by proof. And basically on the form, it asked the court to fill out the date of last payment, and they confirmed that the proof is the court simply filling that part out. So just so you're aware. It's also really important to check the court information form and make sure that the convictions that are listed there match your criminal record, because if the court puts a conviction there that's not on your criminal record, for example, then you would need to get a proof of conviction like we talked about in step 1. Also, the Parole Board of Canada recommends that you ask the court for extra copies of your court documents because apparently if you are granted a record suspension, the court documents may not be available in the future. So it's just a really good idea to just ask them for extra copies. So step 3 is only for current or past members of the Canadian Forces. So if this doesn't apply to you, you can skip this step. And if it does apply to you, see page 7 of the record suspension application guide, because it gives you really detailed instructions on how to obtain your military conduct sheet, as well as any, there's a few other bits of information that you need to include for them. So now we will go to step 4 of the local police records check. So basically, you need to get a local police records check for every city or town, the city or town you currently live in, as well as each city or town you've lived in during the last 5 years for 3 months or more. So if you've moved a lot, unfortunately, this process is a bit time consuming, but you got this. And a local police records check at the Akwesasne Mohawk Police Service is $25 Canadian. So you know. And basically what you'll do is this part involves getting the local police records check form filled out, and that's at the back of the guide. And you'll fill out the first page of the form, and then you'll go to each police service you need to, and you'll show them your criminal record and 2 pieces of ID, and they will fill out the for police use only section of the form. And if you're curious about what local police record checks involve, you can look at the for police use only part of the form, and you'll see it asks for some types of information like all incidents that involve the police. The guide also provides you this really handy checklist on page 8. It's all information that's on the local police records check form. However, again, it's just nice to look at this and just make sure you're hitting those most important points. Also, the Parole Board of Canada lets you know that the local police records check form is only valid 12 months after it's dated and signed. So just by the police. So just make sure that you do this step close to when you're planning to submit your application. So step 5 is very easy, and all you need to do is provide a clear photocopy of a government-issued identification document, and it doesn't have to be a driver's license. This is just an image I put there as an example, but the identification document just needs to include your name, date of birth, and signature, and be government issued. And make sure that this photocopy is clear, so it's not super dark or anything and hard to read. Or make sure it's not. All right, so step 6 is for Schedule 1 offenses under the Criminal Records Act. So Schedule 1 offenses are sexual offenses involving a child. So if you've never been convicted of a Schedule 1 offense, you can skip this step. If you want to know the full list of Schedule 1 offenses, you can go to this link. That's the link to the Criminal Records Act, and it's just at the bottom is Schedule 1, and you'll see the full list. So basically, if you have committed a Schedule 1 offense, here are the instructions. So they say, please note that this step is only required if you have a conviction for a Schedule 1 offense and your first offense was committed on or after March 13, 2012. Or your Schedule 1 offense was committed on or after March 13, 2012. So if you meet this criteria where it is required, then you must complete the Schedule 1 exception form. Now, below you'll see that the instructions are that a convicted person referred to in Schedule 1 may apply for a record suspension if the Parole Board of Canada is satisfied that the convicted person meets the following exception criteria. So they say was not in a position of trust or authority, did not use or threaten to use violence, was less than 5 years older than the victim. So it's a very specific situation where you may be eligible to apply. And basically the exception form, it basically asks you how you meet those criteria. So again, this step is a little bit tricky. So if you've committed a Schedule 1 offense, it's a good idea to just call the Parole Board of Canada and just find out what's required from you in terms of filling out the Schedule 1 exception form. All right, and so now we're going to talk about step 7, and that's just filling out the record suspension application form. So this step is very, very simple. And here on the guide, they just have this simple little checklist for you just to make sure, again, you're filling everything out properly. And they also warn you that it is also like the local police records check form, only valid within the last year after it was done, signed and dated. So again, just make sure you do this step close to when you're planning to submit your application. And also, this is the form where you give them your mailing address. So there's a little blurb on page 10 of the record suspension application guide where it's talking about this step, where they say that if you change addresses, you need to update the Parole Board of Canada. So they let you know everything that you need to include in your letter, updating them of your new mailing address, because the Parole Board of Canada needs to be able to contact you. Also, even if you're granted a record suspension, you still need to let the Parole Board of Canada know your new address. So this is done on an ongoing basis. And you'll see all that information on page 10 of the record suspension application guide. So step 8 is the Measurable Benefit and Sustained Rehabilitation Form. So you're only required to complete step 8 if your first offense was committed on or after June 29th, 2010. So in this step, the Parole Board of Canada says, you must clearly describe how receiving a record suspension would provide you with a measurable benefit and sustain your rehabilitation into society as a law-abiding citizen. So this is the first question on section B of the form. So a measurable benefit basically means how would a record suspension improve your life? And sustained rehabilitation means how would a record suspension help you contribute to society and continue being someone who follows the law. So here are a few examples of measurable benefits. So a measurable benefit could be that the record suspension would help the individual to go back to school, obtain a special license, or obtain a particular job. So those are all examples of it. Also, then question 2 of the form wants to know about the positive changes you've already made in your life to better your situation since your conviction. So this is about the work you've already done. So a Parole Board of Canada officer I was corresponding with gave me these examples of positive changes that an individual could have made to improve their situation. So for example, their family situation could have changed where they got married and they started a family. They could have obtained a new job, started a new volunteering opportunity. There was maybe a change in their education where they went back to school. Another positive change could be that they completed a maintenance program. And maintenance programs are basically they help individuals work on skills they need to reduce their chance of reoffending. And you'll see in this question, they say that you may include supporting documents. So these are any documents that help support these positive changes. So they could be character references from an employer, a volunteer supervisor, or a teacher, or it could be any document proving one of these positive changes, like a document proving a job, proving a volunteer work, school, or maintenance program you completed or are in the process of completing. Now, question 3 of the form wants you to provide information on the circumstances of each offense and how and why they were committed. So the Parole Board of Canada officer I was corresponding with explained that this is your chance to give your side of the events so that the Parole Board of Canada can better understand what led to the offense. So in just terms of describing the events, it's really important that you make sure you answer the who, the what, the when, the where, and the how. And then question 4, it's just for sexual offenses, and you need to include the age of the victim and provide official documentation if it's available. Also, you'll see too, if you look at this form at the back of the guide, there is not a lot of space. So they actually say at the top of the form that you can attach additional pages if you need to. And if you do that, just make sure that you put your name at the top of each page you're writing on, just so that the Parole Board of Canada can identify that it's you. All right, and now we are at our final step, step 9. And this is very simple. It's just including your application processing fee. And the current application processing fee is $50 Canadian. This is a huge difference. Just last year, it was over $600. So it's really wonderful that they've changed their application processing fee. It makes this entire process much more financially accessible. So that is fantastic. Also, there's many ways that you can pay. So you can pay by credit card, and there's a special credit card form at the end of the guide. You can pay by certified check, by money order, or by bank draft. So those are the 9 steps. However, I like to think of submitting your application as a final mini step. So the guide instructs you to just make sure you're submitting all original documents. And so the only photocopy should be that identification document that you're submitting. So just make sure. Also, a really helpful tip that the guide gives you is to make a photocopy of all your application materials for your own records, because after you've done all that work of getting everything, it's just a really nice idea to make sure you make a photocopy for yourself, just in case you ever need to reference it in the future. And again, if you need help making photocopies of that, just contact the Justice Department, and they're very happy to make those photocopies for you. They also have a really helpful checklist at the back on page 12 of the guide. And so it just, again, goes through the 9 steps and just a nice little checklist to make sure you have each form and document you need. Then when you're done, that little final check before submitting your application, you submit all your application package. So all the forms, the application processing fee, and all official documents. You submit it as one application package to the following address. So that's also on the record suspension application guide. Also, it's in that address is in the brochure that the Justice Department has made on this process. And also just a really quick friendly reminder, again, if you have any questions along the way, anything you're unclear about, do not hesitate to contact the Parole Board of Canada to clarify any part of the process. They really are the experts on this, and they're there to answer questions. They're a great resource, and it's so much better to get the right information and make sure you're doing it correctly than get it wrong and have your application returned. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening. And I really appreciate you taking the time, and I wish you best of luck if you are applying for a record suspension. I've also included here the contact information for the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne Justice Department if you ever need their help with getting them to print the record suspension application guide, or to help you make photocopies of anything. So that's their phone number and their address in Akwesasne. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now. All right. So thank you so much again, and best of luck.